That's precisely the role Lenny and Squiggy were built to fill. As Marshall reportedly put it, someone has to be worse off than the main characters for the audience to root properly for them. This wasn't a throwaway gag. It was structural. Every appearance by the pair was designed to be short and explosive, burst in, deliver something absurd, and get out before the moment overstayed its welcome. Williams once compared Marshall's instinct for comic timing to a mathematician's precision, always knowing exactly how long to let a joke breathe before cutting away. The balance mattered because Laverne and Shirley themselves weren't polished, glamorous sitcom leads. They had real flaws and messy lives. For the contrast to work, Lenny and Squiggy's chaos had to be so over the top that it made the two women look composed by comparison, even when they weren't. That tension, two grounded but flawed heroines set against two gloriously undisciplined sidekicks, became part of what made the show feel distinct from other sitcoms of its era. Without that second layer, the series risked becoming a fairly ordinary story about two roommates chasing love and rent money. With it, the show gained an unpredictable comic engine that could reset the energy of any scene almost instantly. If there's one moment people associate with the characters more than any other, it's the door creaking open and that single exaggerated hello, landing like a punchline all on its own. Gary Marshall was famous for demanding relentless pacing on set, and the entrances of Lenny and Squiggy became a kind of ritual built entirely around timing. Lander and McKean choreographed these moments down to the smallest detail. Posture, the length of a pause before speaking, even the angle of a lean. What looked spontaneous to viewers was closely rehearsed. Williams later called it controlled chaos, noting that the appearance of an accident was itself a result of careful engineering. Marshall recalled that the instant the studio audience heard the door creak, laughter was already building before either character said a word. The sound itself had become a trigger. Part of what made the entrances land so consistently was the duo's willingness to break the rules of the scene itself. They had no real reason to be barging into Laverne and Shirley's apartment, interrupting tender or emotional moments, yet they did it anyway, and the unpredictability became the joke. According to McKean, there were nights when he and Lander would swing the door open and simply stand there in silence, letting the anticipation alone earn the laugh before a line was even delivered. Being funny wasn't the hardest part of the job. Staying composed while someone else was funny at you was. Williams and Marshall have both talked about how difficult it became to keep from breaking character whenever Lenny and Squiggy entered a scene. Marshall joked that she nearly bit through her own tongue, trying not to laugh during certain takes. That challenge extended to crew as well, with sound mixers reportedly stifling laughter behind the glass during takes. Before especially risky scenes, Marshall would remind Williams not to make eye contact with either performer, since one glance at Lander's expression or McKean's smirk was often enough to break composure entirely. But the discipline mattered for a reason beyond simple professionalism. Williams explained that if she and Marshall broke character too often, the emotional core of Laverne and Shirley's friendship would stop feeling real, and audiences would disengage from the story underneath the jokes. So the two actresses developed what they described as a kind of emotional armor, treating every entrance as an unpredictable event they had to absorb without losing their grounding as characters. Williams summed up the dynamic simply. The two women were the steady rhythm of the show, while Lenny and Squiggy were the sudden cymbal crash. The chemistry between Lander and McKean outlasted the show itself. McKean went on to notable roles in projects like this as Spinal Tap and Better Call Saul, while Lander built a career as a voice actor known for oddball characters that echoed Squiggy's mischievous energy. Their real-life friendship endured well past the end of Laverne and Shirley, including through Lander's later struggle with multiple sclerosis. When Lander passed away in 2020, McKean described him simply as a kind, funny man, and a friend of more than 50 years. The influence of the duo is still visible in modern sitcom writing. Anytime a mismatched pair walks into a scene with more confidence and sense, echoes of Lenny and Squiggy aren't far behind. A dynamic later shows like Friends and Brooklyn Nine-Nine have leaned on in their own ways. What began as an unscripted bit at a house party turned into one of the most enduring comic partnerships in sitcom history. Proof that sometimes the best characters aren't planned so much as discovered, in the middle of a party, before anyone even knew a script was involved. Part of what makes the Lenny and Squiggy story worth revisiting decades later is how counterintuitive its origin really was. Most memorable sitcom duos are the product of long writers' room deliberation, pitched, workshop, rewritten, and test screened before a single line reaches a soundstage. This one wasn't. It came out of a living room, off script, from two performers who weren't even auditioning. Everything that followed, the ladder theory, the name change, the choreographed entrances, was really just some sitcom characters grow on an audience slowly. Others crash through a door, say a single word, and never let go. That was the case for Lenny Kosnowski and Squiggy Squigman, the two greasers who turned up in almost every episode of Laverne and Shirley just long enough to steal it. Decades later, people still remember the sneer, the leather jackets, and that nasal, unmistakable hello. What's less well known is how close the characters came to never existing in their current form at all, and how much of their chemistry was built long before a camera ever rolled. The duo's first appearance wasn't in an audition room. It happened in Penny Marshall's living room, at one of the loose, laughter-filled evenings she and her then-husband Rob Reiner were known for hosting. The guest list that night included comedians, writers, and actors drifting in and out, the kind of crowd where nobody was performing, technically speaking. Two of the guests stood out, David Lander and Michael McKean. Marshall already knew them from The Credibility Gap, a satirical sketch and music act that had built a devoted following to the 1970s. Their reputation for sharp improvisation preceded them, but nobody expected what happened partway through the party. Mid-conversation, without any prompting, Lander and McKean slid into new voices and postures, and simply became two different people, jittery, awkward, weirdly self-assured tough guys with strange rhythms and sharper timing than either actor's normal delivery. Cindy Williams, who was also in the room, later described a shift as instant chemistry, as if the two men had performed together for years rather than minutes. Marshall agreed. She didn't need a script pitch or an audition tape to see that something was there. She saw two performers who understood exactly how to build a laugh out of nothing, using only posture, pause, and voice. At the time, Laverne and Shirley was still finding its footing. The show followed two working-class friends trying to build independent lives in Milwaukee, and while the central friendship anchored the series emotionally, Gary Marshall, Penny's brother and the show's producer, wanted a second layer. Characters who could interrupt the scene, cause a mess, and vanish before the audience caught its breath. Penny's pitch to her brother was simple. Come see these two guys. There was no formal casting process. Lander and McKean were called to the soundstage the very next day, and whatever spark had lit up the living room reignited instantly under the studio lights. The reaction from the crew mirrored the reaction from the party. Sustained, helpless laughter. Cindy Williams would later joke that watching them work felt like catching lightning twice in the same bottle. They arrived, got the laugh, and left every single time. Here's the twist almost nobody remembers. The characters weren't originally called Lenny and Squiggy. In the earliest concept, Lenny's sidekick was named Anthony, an Italian-American neighborhood kid meant for a single guest appearance. But Laverne and Shirley already had plenty of Italian characters woven through its world. Phil Foster's Frank DeFazio and Eddie Mecca's Carmine Ragusa among them, and the writers realized another one would blur into the background rather than stand out. So the character was rebuilt. Anthony disappeared, and Andrew Squiggy Squigman took his place. No longer clearly Italian, more of a vague, undefined ethnic mashup whose actual background mattered far less than how his name sounded out loud. Squiggy had a strange, bouncy, almost cartoonish quality that made it memorable on first hearing, and it paired perfectly with the plainer, everyman quality of Lenny. That single naming change did more than give a character a new label. It freed the writers to make him stranger, louder, and more unpredictable, since he was no longer tied down by a specific ethnic identity or backstory logic. The tics, the vocal rhythm, the posture all clicked into place once the rewrite was finished. Even Lenny's full name, Kosnowski, was chosen for its comic weight. A joke Marshall once made was that it roughly sounded like someone shouting about a farm animal loose in the kitchen. Every part of their names was engineered to get a laugh before either character spoke a word of dialogue. Williams considered the change a gift to the show. Once the characters became Lenny and Squiggy, she said audiences could sense trouble coming the instant their names came up, long before the pair ever walked through a door. The rewrite also gave the writers room to insert the duo almost anywhere, as neighbors, co-workers, or simply comic interruptions, without needing a strong narrative justification for their presence. By the time the earliest episodes aired, Anthony had vanished from memory entirely. What started as a casting correction turned into one of the more clever structural decisions in the show's history. Producer Gary Marshall didn't just see two funny actors in Lander and McKean. He saw the missing piece of a formula. Marshall approached sitcom construction almost like an equation. Every show needs contrast, characters reaching upward towards something better, and characters below them who make the audience feel, by comparison, that things could be worse. Laverne and Shirley were the dreamers. Two women tried to escape the grind of a Milwaukee brewery job and build something more out of their lives. That gave the show heart. But Marshall believed even the most likable underdogs needed someone louder and Messier to bounce off.